Hello everyone and welcome to a new season, and it is finally that time of the year again. It's time to do our pre-season power rankings. I've done this once before, unfortunately, yesterday, where I recorded this entire video pretty much and then realized I forgot to press record. So hey, take two. You know, it's always better the second time round, right? So let's just get into it and talk about all the finer details of this upcoming season of the Overwatch League and who we think is going to be the winners and who is going to be the losers of the season. Talking of losers, we have to first talk about Platchat. You know, Platchat, they did an episode without me, and it did some heinous crimes against some of these teams. You know, you can look with your eyeballs and start to see some of the issues and glaring issues that you should start to see, primarily these guys down here. But, you know, we'll get into that as we get deeper into the video. But I'm going to do my own power rankings video, and I really wanted to define how I'm going to do my video compared to how Platchat or all these other ones are doing them as well. So first of all, just off the bat, I haven't really watched any scrims going into this season. I did before the Prime, but after seeing the Prime, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of the teams. So I genuinely have no idea what's happening in the Scrimbucks Exchange right now. So I could be completely off base, but I'm not using scrims as a determining factor of who I think is successful or why I think a team is better or worse than they might be in the public eye. The other one is that Platchat, when they did their power rankings, they did it on like season record. Because of how the regions are split, I'm not doing that at all. My power rankings are purely going to be based on who do I think is better than this team. Obviously, that's very arbitrary, and there's so many different things that change throughout a season in terms of meta, but that's what makes preseason fun, and that's what makes doing these rankings fun, is that it literally doesn't make sense, it literally doesn't matter, but it's all just fun and hype going into the new season. So let's just kick off and let's get started with our power rankings. Big shout outs to Solomon. Solomon has once again created a great list that we can sort of, do our preseason power rankings. We got tier breaks, we got all that type of stuff. Let's address the elephant in the room off the bat. The Chengdu Hunters are an unsorted team. They will not be competing in the Overwatch League this season, at least so far from what we've seen. Which is F in chat. They've speedrun getting out of the league, unfortunately. But it'll just be sad because historically the Chengdu Hunters have been a team that's just very exciting to watch. Played a very different style to everyone else. Shout outs to Jinmu. So they will be missing the Overwatch League. But this also results in only 6 teams of the East competing against one another. Obviously with the knockouts having some mix of contenders teams. But that means Chengdu Hunters is officially / unofficially at number 20. But taking our first spot at number 19 in the power rankings is going to be the Vegas Eternal. This shouldn't come as a shock to too many people. The Vegas Eternal had a very poor season last year as the Paris Eternal. They changed almost their entirety of their roster as the season went on. There's a lot of contenders players from North America that were sort of late transition subs that just didn't perform very well. And we were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, saying, they didn't have a lot of time to prepare. They were thrusted into the season. They didn't have preseason, all those types of things. But throughout this most recent offseason, a lot of us were very surprised they didn't make more changes to their roster, and it feels like they're quite content with the contenders roster that they have right now that's sort of trying to prove themselves as players, and that's fine. The issue comes in is that there's some glaring holes within their roster. Right now, if we pull it up, we have Mouthful and Dove on the DPS line, and we saw it just recently in the Pro-Am where Mouthful isn't that comfortable playing Tracer at this point, so he defaulted to Genji a lot, which just isn't very good, unfortunately, right now. You always want to have a hit scan and a Tracer player, and it doesn't feel like Vegas have that. And then you add that to just Vulcan being the solo tank. There's rumors that Rhino is going to be the 6th tank, and he will fill in those main tank roles. That would go a very long way, as Vulcan has struggled to play the Winston from the little bits and pieces we have seen from the Vegas Eternal. But there's a lot of issues just all over the place with this team. I hope that they can prove us wrong and they can start getting some wins on the board. Like, I don't expect this team to like succeed and be middle of the pack, but I just want them to be competitive because there is a fear right now that this team doesn't have the resources or the players to be competitive at the highest level. Obviously, we have Empress coming in to be here. The new head coach of this roster coming from Odyssey has a lot of history with some of these players. Hopefully, can pull the best out of them going into this season. So, let's keep moving though. The Los Angeles Valiant have returned to the West, and they are going to go into our number 18 spot. With Paintbrush at the tip of the spear as the CEO, GM, head coach, social media manager, professional shit poster, all those types of things, or also a player on this roster. The Valiant, it's disjointed. It has all the same issues that it's had in previous years of it's being poorly run, it's being poorly managed. At least they're back in the West, and they have essentially just given the reins to the contenders teams and, you know, Paintbrush, and just sort of sounds like they're letting them go. And the Los Angeles Valiant are leaning into this style a lot, it seems like, from just like early looks of they're just sort of having fun with it. They don't have any pressure on them, and I think that could work for the Los Angeles Valiant, right? While the Vegas Eternal have a heavy microscope under them to at least improve or perform because, you know, there's expectation for this team, considering it feels like they're trying a little bit harder. The Valiant, I don't think anyone expects anything. So they can kind of just go into every match with nothing to lose. And that's a hard thing to play against because if you have nothing to lose, then you can really do anything. And from the little bits we did see from the Prime as well, they were quite coordinated when they were playing that Ramatra Rush. They have Seeker on that hit scan. Nuss, when he was able to play Comfort Heroes, was quite solid. Like, there are good pieces of this team. I don't expect them to be, you know, another team that's going to break into the middle of the pack and sort of turn all of our heads, but it'll be a fun team to watch nonetheless. But the Los Angeles Valiant are continuing to remain a team that, you know, we'll look back at the better years with a little bit of fondness, but this year will not be that year for the Los Angeles Valiant. So I'm actually going to add a tier break here, and this is pretty uncommon to what most people have done, but I feel like it's important to sort of distinguish the difference between this bottom end teams where it feels like it's really just sort of these teams have been shoehorned in a little bit. Yes, they'll be competitive. They are still great players, but I think for this next squad, there's more veterancy. There's more expectation for these teams that there is an upside at some point. So the teams that I'm talking about is going to be the New York Excelsior, and they're going over this tier break. And the New York Excelsior have had a very interesting offseason because they dropped their entire Korean roster last year that had an awful performance. Just for the caliber of players, the talent was there, but they couldn't get the best out of them, and they just couldn't do anything, it felt like. So they dropped their entire roster. There were rumors there was going to be a marginalized roster picked up, but that got a lot of negative feedback from the community, deservedly so. So they sort of found a middle ground where they've signed a lot of players that some of these other teams weren't really looking at or weren't interested in, and, you know, honestly deserve some opportunity in the Overwatch League, and also mix that in with a couple of marginalized players. So let's just talk about this roster, because when you look at it on paper and when we saw it on the Pro-Am, there is a definite upside to these guys. So we got Fitz, Shockwave, Psycho as a DPS trio. You know, Fitz is obviously a very storied DPS player for the Seoul Dynasty alongside Prophet. Great hit scan player, great Sombra player. He honestly is probably the number one player on this team that you should keep your eye on to sort of help them achieve things that many people aren't expecting of them. But Shockwave, Psycho, both players who have been in the league before but haven't found a ton of success and sort of making their return to the league. And that's what I meant when I said these are players that some other teams weren't looking at. Yeah, they don't look towards the European region to pick up their DPS players. But these guys are great players in the right circumstances. But we've seen when they haven't been in the right circumstances in the past that they haven't been able to perform at that level. And that's where a lot of the concerns lie for these guys. We also had Kellen, who was a part of the New York Excelsior last year that just really struggled to get anything done. And it raises the question, is it Kellen's fault? He was obviously a hyped up player coming out of contenders, but he didn't perform very well last year, but either did the entirety of that team. And I think a lot of us look towards the backline for the issues rather than just the tank. But there is still those concerns over Kellen, especially being that solo tank. Then we have Halo and Anion, which are the two players that we haven't seen play for them in the Pro-Am, that are the marginalized players that they sort of wanted to add into this roster, who are solid players in their own rights, but I don't expect them to play over Lep and Creative. Lep and Creative both played for the Houston Outlaws last year. I don't know how much they played directly together because Creative was a late he came and sort of went for the Houston Outlaws, and Lep got sporadic playtime on that roster. But Lep really impressed me in the Overwatch World Cup, US trials. He's definitely a solid main support and a good option for this team. And Creative's definitely had some good moments in his career. He's not that explosive shoe caliber flex support, but he's always been solid in my eyes, and it doesn't feel like he's losing you games a lot of the time, which it can feel like that with some of these other flex supports. So when you put, like, let's say Fitz Shockwave or Fitz Psycho, Kellen, Lep, Creative in the server, this can be a competitive team, and it feels weird putting these guys at 17, but it's just hard to believe in the New York Excelsior right now. We hear the rumors going out of like lack of translators. We don't know what type of resources they're getting. We don't even know who the head coach is still at this point, and the league starts in 3 days. So there's obviously concerns to be had, and for those reasons, I have New York Excelsior so low. As much as the players are there, the talent is kind of there. It doesn't feel like I can believe in this team because it doesn't have any structure. It doesn't have any rhyme or reason. It feels like it's just kind of a slapdash together of like the best players they could find at the time. So New York Excelsior could be a breakout team, but I'm going to have to see it before I believe it for these guys. And another team that I'm going to need to see it before I believe it, we get to see our first APAC team come in to the power rankings, and it just has to be the Shanghai Dragons. The Shanghai Dragons are, when you look at this team, if you just put it on paper, it would kind of be exciting. But then when you look at the roles that they've been put on, it's a little outlandish, because we got Fleta on tank, we got Gangnam Jin on main support, we got DM on flex support. So none of these guys are comfortable on the primary roles that we've just sort of loved and known them for in the past when they've had their success. And then you have some other pieces like Viper coming in as a rookie. We got Hisu, who is a hyped up hit scan player in the league. There's some idea that you're like, oh, maybe it could be good, but realistically, there's too many people cooking. That's the best way I can put it. There's too many people cooking, because they are good players, but none of them know how to play these specific roles or have experience playing in the Overwatch League, playing these specific roles. And my biggest concern about that is when you have so many unknown quantities and you put them all together, what happens is it becomes impossible to work out the problems that are going on when issues arise. And I have that massive concern. As soon as they start losing matches, it's going to be difficult for them to turn it around. Unless these players just end up being individually some of the best in their new roles, I don't see it working. I don't see it gelling. Moon would have to cook up something incredible. They have Bebe as a player coach. He's sort of also the player, the sixth player on this team. I don't expect him to play for these guys. He'll be primarily a coach, and we'll see those other five. And then Moon is the head coach. And it's important because I've heard some people say of like, oh, the Shanghai Dragons have gotten the best out of, their players in the past. And I talked about this in my team preview, but in the past, in 2020, 2021, when Shanghai Dragons had so much success, they had so many resources. Like if you go back to their like 2020, former organization, they had a chief hype man. They had a bunch of translators, they had player managers, they had assistant coaches out the wazoo. They had like 3 assistant coaches every time with the Moon on top of that. They had so many people investing time while also having just the best players in the world at that time. So this is really a massive test for, Moon and the Shanghai Dragons to be able to pull magic out of a hat, it feels like, because it doesn't feel like this is the same Shanghai Dragons. And obviously they were caught up, Shanghai Dragons are owned by NetEase, so they're caught up in that whole kerfuffle with Overwatch and Blizzard as a whole. So they're not putting their best foot forward, and that's why they have to come in here at number 16. It's a weird roster. I'm honestly really excited to watch these guys play because it'll be fun nonetheless. And I don't think it's going to be a complete dumpster fire. I really hope it isn't a complete dumpster fire because I kind of want to see Fleta play tank. And I hope that we get to see some upsides and they can compete with some of these other middle of the pack APAC teams. And that is where the next tier break gets hit. So at the bottom end, it's sort of the, I would say, what contenders teams that are really trying to prove something in the Overwatch League, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of upside. The next level was New York Excelsior and the Shanghai Dragons, where it's these teams are just a hodgepodge of players put together, just sort of a mixing pot, but they have talented players, and I think there's more of an upside. Now I'm going to add a tier break, and we're going to go to, in my opinion, the next tier where these teams make sense. There's a great idea there, but maybe they don't have the great level of players or the execution to pull off the roster that they're trying to do. So I'm going to start here with a team that I think is getting overrated coming out of the Pro-Am. We were quite negative, primarily me, quite negative onto this team heading into this season when the roster was announced. And it's going to be the Washington Justice. Because when we went into the Pro-Am, we had a lot of, in my opinion, valid concerns about this roster of they're kind of like a weird mix of like Korean talent and European talent. We got, Get Amaze putting together an interesting team, and I think it will be a solid team and it will be a competitive team at this region, but in my opinion, it just doesn't gel and it doesn't make me excited. Like Alfie is obviously an incredible DPS and we saw that and what he can provide to this Washington Justice squad, but I feel like people saw Washington be competitive with like Boston and Gladiators for just like a couple of maps, and like they didn't win those maps really. They were just competitive. They only won that one over the Gladiators when Gladiators were still struggling, and people have sort of shot Washington up to the moon, and I'm just not there. And I think this team might have synergy issues as the season goes on, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just my residual resentment for the Washington Justice from previous years sort of seeping into this year, because it's important to keep in mind the Washington Justice of old, when, the Mag, Pre, sort of, Supreme, all those kind of people, like that is over, right? Like they're all gone and that whole bones has been thrown out. And this is a really completely new roster. But that adds my own concerns to it as well, is that like, Alfie has never really played in a mixed roster. I don't believe Flora has played in a mixed roster either. So the DPS lineup are sort of kind of in a weird spot. Alfie has communicated in English because he was on the Hangzhou Spark, but I'm just not sold that this team is going to mesh as well as some of these other teams, especially with how stacked other rosters have come. So for me, I have the Washington Justice sort of staying at this number 15 level, and they're going to have to sort of really prove to me that they can compete in the middle of the pack with some of these other top teams, which I think is possible, and I might be too down on the Washington Justice, but I think this is the hill I want to die on. I feel like I saw, especially the Plat Chat boys, really get confident in the Washington Justice from their Pro-Am performance with, the reasonable upsides that we have seen. Flora Hanzo looked really good. Alfie just playing absolutely anything. Like Alfie played Genji and I was like, honestly, I'm okay with it. Like I was willing to let it go. Ben Best Winston looked solid. Obviously there was the issues with bringing Mira in, but that's preseason stuff. And you have FD God and Terry. Like there's a lot of upside, but at this point it starts to get difficult when you have to start choosing between some of these great teams. So next we have coming in at the number 14 spot, I believe this is going to be, is the Seoul Dynasty. Seoul Dynasty is a weird team, and this is another one that I think people might believe I'm underrating, especially when you look at what other people have started to do. But here's my major worry for the Seoul Dynasty is when Prophet got re-signed to the Seoul Dynasty and we saw his translations. Obviously, it's just translations. It's hard to get a true vibe check. But Prophet didn't sound like he was, yeah, I'm coming back. I'm trying to win a championship with the Seoul Dynasty. I'm really excited to play with, these new players. I think we have a lot of upside. I didn't feel that from what we've seen or like anything. It just feels like he's like, yeah, I'm just coming back for another year. You know, I'm excited to be here and I'm going to have some fun. And it feels like a victory lap for his career. And when you pair that with the other big piece of this team, which is Void, who was like pretty much said he was going to retire last year, has come back for another season. Like, it kind of feels like these guys are just sort of relishing in the fact of like, hey, we can play in the Overwatch League, and they can. Like, they're both two of the greatest players to ever touch this game within their roles, and they deserve a victory lap. But that doesn't give me confidence that this team is going to be able to compete with some of these other top teams in the world when others are trying harder. You know, Prophet, Little P is a good hit scan, right? Like, and he will be able to pair well against Prophet, but still unproven within the Overwatch League. Lee Soo Min and Krillin are both flex support players. So they have a double flex support setup. And, you know, Lee Soo Min's a good flex support coming out of contenders, but that forces Krillin to play the main support. And Krillin's main support last year that we saw from him was lackluster, and it's unlikely it's going to be the best. So given certain metas, Seoul Dynasty could be a very good team. Like, let's be honest, if we can play Sigma double flex support everywhere, they're going to be golden, and they will be a much better team than this power ranking suggests. But if we go to Winston, Tracer, Sombra, like many of us are assuming, and sort of what the tea leaves are saying right now, if you look at scrims and what people are playing, in terms of like, you know, the rumors of that, that's really bad for this team. If Void has to play Winston, Prophet can play Tracer, but then Prophet has to go to Sombra, you know, maybe something he's not as comfortable on, and then maybe Krillin has to play Lucio, unless we're playing Ana Brig, but then it's like, what's Krillin's Brig like? Like, that's what I think we're going to have with the Seoul Dynasty, is a lot of questions, and they have to come out strong and provide these answers, that they have this drive and that dog in them to be a competitive top-end team, and I'm just worried that they're not going to have that. And it feels like they're kind of sort of, they'll be solid, they'll be around, and they'll be competitive, and, you know, teams can, you know, sort of fight against them. But I don't believe that this is going to be the Seoul Dynasty that is going to be fighting for championships in the way that they have in the past. You know, they have retained Toby and MMA as the coaches, which I have a lot of respect for. I like what they did with the team last year, especially in the first half of the season. But too many question marks for me with this Seoul Dynasty team, especially with my fear that you know, Prophet's been playing this game since, you know, 2016 and being like top-end competitive player since 2016. He is literally one of the most OG players that we've had that's had a consistent span of playing throughout his career. If he comes out with that drive for year number, 7 or 8, I would be absolutely blown away, especially with sort of the vibe that he's provided so far. So I can't have that utmost confidence in the Seoul Dynasty right now, and that's why they're here at number 14. The next team I'm going to have is the London Spitfire. And London's an interesting team because they had a lot of success last year. They came into, you know, last year with a lot of hype for themselves because they were, you know, selling themselves as the underdog. No one believes in us. You know, everyone saw how poorly we did in 2021, but we know we're better in 2022. And they genuinely were better in 2022. As much as at the start of the year, they leaned on Hardy playing that Reinhardt, sort of forcing teams away. Towards the end of the year, Hardy was playing Winston, and they ended up top 6 in the Overwatch League in the playoffs above teams that we would never have expected the London Spitfire to beat. So you need to put some respect on their name, and it feels like this placement is disrespectful, but this kind of feels like where I expect the London Spitfire to slightly underperform. And I think the reason I have London underperforming is they have the opposite expectations this year. Last year, they could come in as the underdog, while now I feel like this year they're coming in and they have to back up their performance that they did last year. And with the additions that they've made, I'm not sold that they've made upgrades, and I'm worried it's going to hurt their power of friendship style of, I liked it when they had, you know, Backbone just playing whatever he needed to play. I feel like he was thriving in the situation where they just had utmost confidence that he could play anything. Even like Zenyatta, you know, like he was playing Zenyatta, he played Widowmaker, he played things that we didn't even know he could play because the team required him to do that because they were only 5 players. But even from the little bits we've seen from the Pro-Am with like Lethal coming in, Sky Ripper, like I understand these additions, but they look very disjointed. And maybe over time that will get fixed as, they come into the friendship circle. But it feels like there's more pressure on these guys to perform, and I'm worried that's going to actively hurt them as the season goes on, and that they'll sort of normalize more towards an area in which they're expected to be, because they have great players, but in my opinion, I don't think, any of their players are in the top 3 or 5 within their respective role, right? Like, Spark is an incredible hit scan. Hardy had some incredible moments on tank, but against some of the quality of these other players in the league, I can't see these guys just being that level. And especially if we go into a dive meta like we're looking into this year, at least for the start, I'm just a little concerned. And that's why I have London Spitfire towards the bottom end of this pack of the middle. Quick coffee break as we all take a breath. Whew. All right. There are some people who are looking at their teams or looking at some of these teams and being like, how high are these guys going to go? Because let me bring you back around to Plat Chat and sort of look at here. There's a couple of teams that are sort of making their runs, right? Like you can start to see some of these differences. Like, Guangzhou, they had them at 15. Like we agreed on London that they were going to underperform, but I haven't said Vancouver. Seoul Infernal still in the pool. Like there's a lot of ways to go, but do not worry. Coming in at number 12, I think this is 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. Number 12 is the Guangzhou Charge. And I think the Guangzhou Charge are a team that were disrespected, what it felt like, by the Plat Chat boys. I understand looking at the results of the Guangzhou Charge last year and sort of being down on them, but when you consider the second half of the season comparatively to the first half, they got dramatically better as the season went on by just adding better players. Realistically, like they added Jimmy, they added Xerneas later in the season. I can't remember, but yeah, Faraway got added, like in May. Piggy came in September. Like their roster dramatically changed from what it once was. And towards the end of the season, these players were playing quite well. And it makes sense when you look at these players individually and where they've come from. Choice of One has been a staple for the Guangzhou Charge since 2021 season. And I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for this guy. He's very solid. He's gone toe-to-toe, even with lackluster teammates around him, with some of the best DPS players that we have in the APAC region. Jimmy, as much as he was a meme on my channel, Jimmy fucks, and him doing wild stuff to no avail, he's genuinely had upside, and he genuinely is a good hit scan in this league these days. We were hyped up for a Predator coming into this league, but Jimmy genuinely was the better hit scan towards the end of last year, and he fought for his spot, and he deserves this spot. So Choice of One, Jimmy, as much as it's not this world-class DPS duo that we've seen from some of these other teams, it is solid, and I don't think you can be upset with having these two guys. While Piggy is coming out from, the Houston Outlaws, and he's been around the block, it feels like he's an off-tank, he's good at the Diva, and he's good at the Sigma. There are concerns that he's going to be able to play the main tank heroes, but there's a lot of teams that have those concerns. And Piggy, to me, seems like he's a player who would thrive in having that sort of like expectation around he has to just play everything and he's just got to handle it and deal with it. And, maybe he's turned over a new leaf. He's had a massive weight loss, and maybe I'm just being optimistic and, a little, hopeful for Piggy as a player. But I genuinely think Piggy will have some upside, as much as he will be a concern and a pain point for this team, especially, if Winston metas do become a thing. With everything else around him, I think he should be at least somewhat comfortable to be able to play in this spot. And Xerneas and Faraway, 1987, if we went back to 2020 or 2021, when these guys were like really starting to come into the league and have success, they were considered some of the best supports coming out of the Chinese region. Like I think Avast loves 1987 as a player. He is a very solid flex support player. And then Yveltal / Xerneas has had a lot of success on the Chengdu Hunters and was one of the reasons they had their wins for, the entirety of the 2021 season. So this is a good backline. So when you put it all together, as much as it does feel kind of random. It makes sense when you have that. And the fact that they've sort of been entrusted to remain on this team, they have a little bit of pre-existing synergy from last year. I think this is a team that, as much as I don't think they're going to massively overperform, they're not going to break into the top end of APAC, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to fail in such a poor way that they're going to end up, you know, towards that like 15th level. They have Sungwoo and Ty Dollar. Sungwoo was a part of this Chengdu Hunters team for a very long time, and Ty Dollar came over, I believe, at the same time as Piggy. So there's a lot of familiar pieces for the Charge, which is important when you have so many other rosters which have just blown up and completely restart heading into this season. So coming in here at number 11 is going to be the Seoul Infernal. And I will explain my next pick in just a bit, but let me talk about the Seoul Infernal, because a part of me thinks I'm overrating this team. But then I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's kind of hard to not rate these guys. You know, we got M3 and Zest, a phenomenal DPS duo for the Philadelphia Fusion last year. Last year, they were rookies. There were some pain points of like a little bit of inexperience coming through, especially in matches that matter, but that was overpowered, in my opinion, by just the raw firepower that both of these guys bring out. Zest and MN3 won matches literally on their own in certain situations throughout that season. If they can add some consistency with a little bit of experience, that will be massive for these guys. Fixer has returned from the Philadelphia Fusion as well, which is a fine signing. You know, he's not as sexy of a main support as, you know, your Chorongs or your Chios or anything, but I think he's solid. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever looking at Fixer make massive mistakes, and he's just sort of there. And if you're going to have a weaker player, in my opinion, having it in main support is one of the best places to have it, because the variance for the differential is much lower. So we have Skewed coming on alongside him, which I'm really excited to see Skewed become that solo main support player. He's always played his career behind Shu on the Los Angeles Gladiators, and we never really got a vibe check for how good he is within his own role, because he pretty much came in as a Brig specialist throughout the entirety of his career. He came in to play a little bit of Zenyatta when they played double flex support, but for the most part, Skewed has been either on the bench or playing Brig. So now he is the guy. It has to be him to be able to step up for this Infernal team. And I'm excited to see what he can bring, because I genuinely don't know. A lot of the people we've talked to about him, or, you know, have rumored saying he's a great flex support in his own right, he's just not Shu. And I think that's absolutely fair. So it's cool to see him get his own spot. But then we go on to Mag as the solo main tank. And Mag is, you know, we've had our history in the past of, you know, me and Mag, you know, go back a long way to the Washington Justice, where, God, that was a trip. Mag was hyped up coming into, I think, 2021 to be one of the best rookie main tanks coming into the league. And we saw that from time to time on the Winston, pretty much exclusively. That was the only thing we really saw him have, that like massive peak. But he had a lot of issues as time went on. His Wrecking Ball struggled. We were unsure if him, you know, sort of feeding from time to time was just on him, or if that was a team issue. There's definitely some underlying team issue stuff that's going on there. So this really becomes Mag's opportunity to prove that he has what it takes to be able to sort of be the guy and the solo tank for his team. We haven't seen any of his off tank for the most part. He's going to have to prove that he can play that. But for right now, him as the solo tank is fine. You know, maybe the potential of Mag will finally be reached, but maybe he is the problem and he can be that player that would drop the Seoul Infernal down. And maybe that's the irking concern. Maybe this is just, once again, lingering Washington Justice sort of bias that I'm pulling in, that I am worried about this team. And that's why I didn't put them at that number 10 spot in this region, because as much as they have the firepower, and I'm honestly very excited to see this team, if it all gels, they will be a very competitive team. Something in the back of my mind says this is going to have the same inconsistency issues that we saw from the Philadelphia Fusion in the past. So, coming in at number 10 as the fans rejoice because they've just been ignored this whole time. And honestly, I feel like there wasn't enough respect put towards this team for the Plat Chat as well, it's going to be the Vancouver Titans. And I know, this is a little ridiculous of a placement for the Vancouver Titans, but you got to have your hot takes. You got to have your ideas and your optimism heading in, because I've had my hot takes of teams that I think are going to be average or underperform within their skill bracket. I think this is the team that's going to overperform for their skill bracket. Something about this squad, and it feels like they're just sort of being released after sort of being trapped within the Boston Uprising. I believe in the Punk, Faith, Crimzo sort of trio that is coming from that Boston Uprising squad. I think they were kind of caged with all the subs, all the drama, all the, Korean, Western mixing from previous seasons. It genuinely feels like these guys are kind of being like given the keys to the car of like, you guys are R5. Go. Like, we believe in you guys. Punk, we're not going to try and replace you with another tank. Faith, Crimzo, we believe in you guys in the back line. Just perform. And I think there's a lot of freedom that is given when you're just told that you are the five guys. You don't have that constant pressure breathing down your neck of like, hey, you can be replaced. You can be benched at any point by this guy if you don't perform these scrims. You're no longer splitting scrim times with your other players. You don't have that. Like, these guys all want to win. These guys have everything to prove. They don't need that pressure of being benched breathing down their neck. That just adds an extra weight that isn't additive in my eyes. It just hurts your team. And we saw that from the Boston Uprising. And then when you pair that with Aspire Sugar Free, like an incredible Western DPS duo, their flexibility is one that's unmatched. I think these guys will be able to play almost anything that could be thrown at them in the league. Aspire's hit scan is absolutely peaking right now. He went crazy in the US World Cup trials. Plus, he has that tracer in his wheelhouse, which is so important given certain metas that might come up. And then Sugar Free is this hyped up young rookie that's been around for such a long time. And I had my concerns about him when he was initially signed of like, he didn't compete last year in Overwatch. He just sort of like retired for a year. He was sort of waiting. And then he's come back. But from what we saw in the Prime, from what we've seen in the World Cup trials for the Team USA that have been streamed, he is in a top form. And he will probably only get better as time goes on, as he gets more scrim time, as he gets more experience against the best players in the world. So this DPS duo, I'm very high on. And obviously, there's some world-class DPS duos, so I can't say they're one of the best. But they have to be competitive, especially in the Western scene. So I'm very bullish on this team. I think these guys are going to be sneakily good and kind of what the London Spitfire were last year, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of upside. We're excited about these guys, but they can't be that good. I think that this will be that gatekeeper team within the mid-range where they will take some matches off against, some of these top-end teams, the 5, 6, 7, 8s in the Overwatch League. They're going to be able to win those matches. They're going to be competitive. They're going to be always hounding to move further up the top, but I can't see them in the same tier right now competing with the Washington Justice or the Seoul Dynasty around those guys. I think there's a lot more confidence I have in these guys. And maybe that's just some hard Australian bias copium, but this is one of my most excited teams that I'm looking for heading into this season. And, that's a weird one because it kind of came out of left field for me as well. So what will the Vancouver Titans provide? Will they prove me wrong or will they prove me right? And that is the end of this middle of the pack tier. These are all the teams, in my opinion, that are put together well. They make sense, but there are concerns around, hero pools or player quality and all that type of stuff. And it's important to remember that this tier, honestly, you could probably roll a 6-sided dice and put these teams wherever, and that would potentially be the way it's going to line up as well. These teams, every time we go into these seasons and we do these preseason rankings, some of these teams are going to shit the bed. Some of these teams are going to exceed expectations. And it's impossible at this point to predict which one of those teams is going to be which. So have a little bit of hope, have a little bit of optimism, but I genuinely believe this tier will stay somewhat around the same. At the end of the season, these 6 teams will all be quite close to each other in terms of power. But in what order? Hopefully it's this one. Hopefully it's this one. But we need to keep things moving, chat. We don't want this to be a 2-hour video. we're going to be looking at the top 9. And there is not going to be a tier break for these top 9. And this is the same thing I was just talking about, where these teams could be some of the best. They could be some of the worst of this tier, depending on how things shake out for these guys. But I think there is a pretty clear top end and a pretty clear bottom end within a certain variance. And at number 9, it's going to be the team that I've been quite negative on in the public. I think it's being blown out to a pretty ridiculous proportion now because of the rumors of the scrims start to come out, but it's going to be the Boston Uprising. Boston were a team that put together a 2021 super team of, these guys have a bunch of championships under their belt. I think it's 8. They are a very solid team. If you look back into the past and how much experience and playoff experience these guys have, they have at some point, every single player on this team at some point has pretty much been considered one of the best players in their roles. So the reason I have them at number 9 and the reason I was so critical of this team in the past is Boston Uprising is a team of players kind of similar to my problem I had with Profit for the Seoul Dynasty of, I don't know how much dog in them they have anymore. How much drive and passion to be the championship team that they have. Coming into this team, I'm sure it's going to be there, but especially with the recent rumors sort of proving my point is there's a lot of expectation that this team is going to be great. And with some of the history that some of these players have, like Striker and Decay, of when things aren't going their way, it starts to cause more problems. It feels like that could happen to this Boston Uprising squad, where if things don't start going their way, players are going to start phoning it in. And they're going to start not having that drive to sort of like be the best anymore. Through just sheer talent alone, these guys will always be competitive at the top end. They will always be in this top 9. But I do believe this team is going to boom. I do think this team is going to look very different to the way it looks right now. But, maybe they'll prove me wrong. Obviously, people got very excited for this team, at the Pro-Am, but then they blew out in the first round to the Toronto Defiant, which potentially should have been a 3-0, but Boston did fight it back. There is a world in which they just come together, everything clicks, and everything pops off. But with the recent rumors that scrims aren't going well for the Boston Uprising, they're canceling scrims, players are trolling in scrims, all that type of stuff. Those are usually like the first signs that a team is having major issues. And it's very rarely that those things fix themselves unless the team just has a lot of success. I do remember talking to, the GG Recon guys recently, and they sort of said, Boston does have a pretty easy schedule to start their season, which could be a massive boon for these guys because they start to see some early success. They start to get things moving. Maybe that will sort of cover up a lot of the issues, but that just means harder days are coming towards the end of the season, which could hit even more pain points. So that's why I have Boston Uprising at number 9. And then as we go to number 8, it's my time. It's that time of year where I have to insult the Dallas Fuel fans. Dallas fans, they're already queuing up the comments like, I fucking knew that Custa was going to disrespect my Dallas Fuel. But I really struggle to see them going above this 8 spot. They're going to be competitive and, they could go up to like top 5, but I do not think this Dallas Fuel roster is a championship winning roster in the same way that it was last year. Last year they had a lot of great pieces that once they hit their potential, they can win, the championship, which you can say is there again, but there is a lot more concerns this year than there were last year. And, honestly, the fact that, I'm even putting Dallas Fuel here is just respect to the players that were on this team in the past because, Sparkle and Edison, Sparkle, I've been critical of his traits in the past. Obviously, it's world-class now, one of the best that we have. He's a great DPS player. He plays that flex DPS better than anybody else. He has a deep hero pool with that Tracer in his wheelhouse. Anyone would love to have Sparkle, especially when he brings in sort of that team camaraderie and that confidence that he brings. Edison was a player that not many people were that excited for when he first joined the Dallas Fuel. He kind of washed out of the Atlanta Reign, and not many teams were willing to give him a chance. But Rush just, I don't know what Rush does, what he's feeding these players, but Edison was just time after time last season just leveling up on all these certain heroes. And towards the end, that Sojin performance was world class. He went toe to toe with Proper, one of the better hit scans that we have, especially on that Sojin. And he went toe to toe and he had a great performance. You need to put respect on this DPS line. So as much as I still do have some concerns around, like, if we end up in a Widow meta, is Edison going to be able to hang with, you know, your Lips, your Shies, all that type of stuff? Maybe not, but I got to give them the benefit of the doubt at this point. It's the same thing with Hanbin. He's a solo tank. He's only an off tank. He doesn't know how to play the main tanks. He's always had Fearless by his side, but it don't matter. It's Hanbin. This man has never disappointed. He always finds a way to define the meta and find a way to have success. So these three right here, I have no problems with, right? They will find a way to play the game that they want to play and find some success. Where my concerns really lie is with the backline. So Bliss, Avril's been yelling from the rooftops that Bliss is this great contenders main support that could be Chio 2.0. But he's not Chio. And he might be as good as Chio, but I don't see him exceeding Chio. So for me, it's either equivalent or a downgrade to what they once had. And there is no chance, you know, I don't care how much Rush is able to get out of MCD. I don't see MCD becoming as good as Fielder. Fielder is such a tempered, smart player who just makes plays time after time for that Dallas Fuel roster that I can't see MCD and Bliss being as good as Chio Fielder. Maybe in a perfect world, they will be equivalent. But that's a perfect world, and I just can't see that coming together. So with only 5 players on this roster, not a lot of flexibility to sort of fill in those holes. I'm worried that if they're not able to play the style that they want, right? Like, you know, it's important to remember last year, Dallas Fuel, like, they had to go against the meta multiple times because they just couldn't perform at the level that they needed to. You know, Kickoff Clash, they played this like Zarya Reaper stuff. You know, they were always sort of reinventing things to sort of catch other people off guard, but that's what Dallas does best. They make other people play their game. So maybe they can do that again. But I can't see these guys, especially with how stacked this Western region is, being able to go toe-to-toe all the time in proper meta stuff with some of these other teams. If they do, Rush has to be one of the greatest coaches of all time. If he is able to get the best out of MCD and Bliss, this team is able to be top 3, top 5, I will take my hat off to Rush. Like, I genuinely will. Aiden Rascal as well. Like, what they do with their players is unmatched. Some of these other coaches that we talk about as some of the greatest coaches in the past have just had the genuine best players around them. And obviously still great coaches, but they've just had the best players around them. That makes it easier to coach. Well, I feel like Rush has multiple times pulled the best out of players, which not many people thought they had. He did it in Paris Eternal. He's done it in Dallas Fuel. He's pulled, you know, some of these players that no one else wanted into championship caliber team. You need to put some respect on that. As much as I'm not putting respect on it, some people have to, you know, and this is just, as I said, maybe it's residual resentment from 2018 that's just bleeding into my heart. And I just can't look past it. Maybe I'll be wrong about the Dallas Fuel again. I'm sorry, Dallas fans. Tasmom, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I just can't do it, man. My heart just doesn't believe in this Dallas Fuel roster heading into this season. Especially, you know, they're in the East, obviously, so we're not, unfortunately, not going to see them play as much against some of these other teams we'd love to see them. But, you know, that's just the way things are. Okay, let's keep it moving. We have the Toronto Defiant coming in at number 7. And I think some people will find this surprising. I think some people had them at 9, some people had them at 8. I have a lot of faith in this Toronto Defiant squad. I think they have a lot of confidence, and there is a deep roster as well that I think is going to take them really far. And you can see how much these guys enjoy playing with each other. If you just look at their social medias, the way they do interviews, they genuinely love playing with each other. They respect each other a lot. They're very similar vibes. You know, they're bringing in that personality, and they have the talent to back that up as well, and that confidence that they need. And I think that confidence is feeding off of each other to become better players. That I think you're going to see the best of some of these players individually, and it's going to hit a new level. As much as I'm still only putting them at 7, I think there's a lot of potential that they could get to that next level and just sort of peak and go crazy, but it's hard to sort of give them that going in and doing these preseason power rankings. You know, Hydron, Sam, and Speedily is a great DPS trio. I think Hydron's a world-class hit scan, and he's shown that on the Florida Mayhem last year. Speedily has been putting a lot of work into his tracer and has said, I want to be one of the best tracers in the world. And he has been the best at Echo in the past. If he just commits and he has the coaching staff behind him, right? He's got Kasaurus, he's got No Heal, he's got Wheats. If he has those people aiding him in that, I don't doubt his mechanics to be able to get there. He just needs to put that time and that effort in. So you pair that with Sam's flexibility in the back, you know, sort of to fill in everything else. This is a scary DPS trio. Then you have the support line of OG, Ultraviolet, Surmaged. Literally, that's the perfect three support lineup that you could ask for, right? You know, Ultraviolet will be the mainstay, especially on that Ana. He's playing some of the best Ana in the world right now. And you have OG to be his paired, you know, main support on Lucio Brig. We've seen how good those guys are together. Then you add the raw firepower of Surmaged if they want to play double flex support. What's not to like? The only concern that I have with these sort of DPS and support lineup is that they have to sub players to have that flexibility. And that's a valuable thing that some of these other players have, where with a 5-player, 6-player roster, they have flexible players who can really play everything, while I don't think that's as true for this Toronto Defiant team. But as long as they have the right players in at the right times with the right meta reads, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. And the big pain point that really lives in this Toronto Defiant squad is Kaluge as the solo tank. Kaluge is great at the things that he's good at, you know, Divas, Sigmas, all those types of stuff, but he's not a main tank player. And his Winston is obviously much improved, especially from playing under Krusty for the San Francisco Shock last year. But he said himself, you know, and even he said on Plat Chat, I don't like Wrecking Ball. I'm not going to practice Wrecking Ball. They're going to need to get a short-term contract if Wrecking Ball becomes meta, which was a joke, but also not a joke at the same time, because we've seen him play Wrecking Ball. I saw it very recently in the World Cup trials. It's kind of drunk driving. Like, the man's all over the place. It's not good. He will not be able to hang with the top-end Wrecking Ball players in the world, at least right now. Maybe he's putting the time in. Maybe we'll see some massive improvements. Maybe they're just gambling that there won't be a Wrecking Ball meta. Like, that honestly could be true as well. But there's a world in which they get caught off guard, and I wouldn't be surprised if a short-term contract does get signed if we start to go in that direction. But everything else, I'm happy with Kaluge, but that is the major pain point. So a lot of upside. There are some question marks and some concerns of, like, especially with these guys in the past, of there's been a little bit of boomage. Maybe if things don't start going their way, it could cause a problem, but I have utmost confidence that these guys are going to be able to compete at this level. So coming in at number 6 is going to be the Los Angeles Gladiators. And obviously they did well in the Prime and they defied a lot of expectations, but I'm not sold that this Gladiator squad is going to be a championship roster right now. I think in certain metas with certain things, I could be sold onto it, but Kai's inconsistency is going to be a concern for me, as well as his flexibility of, like, Kai Sombra. As much as people will be like, oh, he's played Sombra, it's pretty good. Like, it's definitely not his strong suit. So we'd probably see Yaki come in. So then you got Kevster Yaki playing these Tracer Sombras, and Yaki Sombra did look okay, but there's a lot of movement that's going on there that I like their DPS lineup, especially anything with Kevster. What's not to like? But Yaki and Kai both raise concerns for me. You know, Yaki is obviously, you know, probably was not the problem on the New York Excelsior last year. But there are some worries there, especially when his best hero is Tracer, and he's not going to play Tracer on this team. Not while Kevster exists here. So Yaki's going to have to fill other things and, you know, kind of waiting for those, like, Sombra, Genji, Echo types of metas. And then you have Kai, which, as I said, like, he has some world-class performance and he had some great moments in the Pro-Am, but he also went missing from time to time. And you saw when he went missing, it was very evident, because that's what ended up causing Dante to feel isolated. And then Dante is a very big, I will throw my body at the enemy team. Please follow up. And if they don't follow up, that's kind of why it looks like Dante is feeding, because he does that even when they're winning. It looks good, because even if he dies, the team is following up. Kevster and Kai are getting kills. People are getting kills. But when that follow-up isn't there and problems are starting to form, it just looks like feeding from Dante. And especially with this, you know, Winston meta expected to come through, there is concerns that, you know, wait, I just went to the, I'm talking about my brain just lagged. You guys see that? I put in the Houston Outlaws and I was, like, looking at it and I'm like, wait a second. Wait a second. Something's not right here. But yeah, so as Dante is the solo tank, you know, you have to have that concern of like, he's never really disappointed within this role. And that's why you have to keep putting respect there. But he doesn't look super comfortable every time. It feels like I'm watching him play tank. We saw some weird stuff. He played a little bit of Junker Queen. So it'll continually be a pain point, I think, for this Gladiators, having Dante as that solo tank. But I don't think he's ever going to be the major issue. But I also don't think he's going to be the solution in certain times. In the same way that, like, you know, a Fearless or a Hanbin has been for the Dallas Fuel, I don't think Dante's going to just be like, okay, you guys are struggling, I will, boom, take over the game. Maybe on, like, you know, certain, like, niche heroes, we could see that, like a Zaya or a Junker Queen, but for the heroes of, like, Winston and those types of things, we haven't really seen his Wrecking Ball either. You have to be a little concerned about him. And the backline, I kind of like, you know, they've been, from the Prime, they were putting a lot of emphasis on playing Babel over Lastro. So Lastro was coming in to be that like double flex support and flexible player, but Funny Astro's the Lucio guy, Babel was the flex support, and then Lastro was filling in everything in between, which honestly is solid. I just personally, it can have that sort of concerns in the same way that I talked about Atlanta Reign of having to make subs to make changes within a match can be a big problem because teams can read you and play against you. And when things aren't going well in the map, it becomes very difficult to flex around and sort of play to these other styles. So I think the Los Angeles Gladiators will be a good team. I think that we'll see a lot of variance from this team of like, I think they'll be very good in some metas in the same way that we saw the Prime. They made it to the grand finals, but I think we'll see some low points for them as well. You know, very hit and miss. Very similar to the way the Gladiators have played in the past. You know, we got Face, Hunter, and Smash coming back as coaches. I have a lot of respect for those guys. They'll be able to make this team work regardless of what's going on. I don't see this team ever like hard shitting the bed, kind of like they did in Jotes. But, you know, they'll at least be competitive in this top 9. So, we're going into the top 5. Ooh, baby. Top 5. All right. Let's keep it moving. We don't want this to go too long. I'm putting the Florida Mayhem. Florida Mayhem are a great team who showed that in the Prime. They made it to the grand finals. They made the grand finals look pretty easy. They made everything look pretty easy. We got to see how this team would work when you have someone who is sort of that tip of the spear. He is the defining factor. They're playing around him, but they've finally surrounded him with great players. You know, they acquired Merit and Chorong in the offseason, which were ridiculous acquisitions. Merit continuously proving he's one of the best hit scans in the world. Chorong is one of the best main supports, especially when you see him sort of like putting in a little bit of Ana. He's able to flex over to these flex supports and looks comfortable at it as well. That's a massive boon for this team. And with only a 6-player roster and, you know, not expecting Sorno to play a ton unless the meta dictates it, they have a pretty versatile 5-player core. And when you have RuPaul, who it kind of feels like the odd player out as the only American in a 4 Korean player team, he just won finals MVP. He was the best flex support, which is wild to say with how many great flex supports are in this league. He was the best flex support in the Prime. His Ana is insane. The playmaking potential is insane. And when you have players like Checkmate stepping up to the plate and sort of showing that I can hang at this level if I have the team around me, that's a big setup. The concern we have is like, how high can this team really go? When you do have all these other teams coming in, you know, your Atlanta Reigns, your Shocks, your Sparks, when you guys go up against those guys also being able to match or be better within those roles, are they going to be able to play at that level? We genuinely don't know. I have a lot of respect for Goomba and McGravy as the coaches. They've always said, we just pull these players in together. We get the best players we think we can get. We work out synergy and communication later. And that kind of feels like what we're seeing here. We didn't see them be truly tested yet, in my opinion. Like, it felt like, you know, Gladiators pushed them a little bit, but for the most part, Florida were the best team. They looked the best drilled. They looked like they understood the meta the most. Someone very had a great understanding, of how to play the game and how to deal with situations when it feels like he's being countered, right? Like the Gladiators, when they tried to play the Ramatra Rush that took down the Houston Outlaws, someone was just like, oh, we're not switching. We're playing Winston. I know how to beat this. And he dismantled that instantly and forced Dante to take that Winston mirror as well. So, you know, as much as they did lose some of those maps, it felt like Florida were always in a commanding lead in that series. So this team is exciting, and it kind of feels like the underdog story that's just gonna like keep getting better. They lost, their underdog story of like someone's like the anime protagonist, and he's like, oh, I made it to the league, and he like has his success, but he has to fall short in the first season because you can't be hyper successful in the first season, and this is the second season where he like wipes up the blood off of his chin. He's like, we go again. And then we have two new protagonists of, Merit and Churon coming in to back him up. Like, it genuinely feels like an anime sports movie right now of these guys coming back. And this could be the underdog story of where they start, fighting for a championship if everything goes their way. But I can't put them higher than 5 just because of how good these guys are. And here is where I'm going to put the Houston Outlaws. And I want us to remember and go back to this Plat Chat Power Rankings real quick. Like, it is, in my opinion, unfathomable how the Houston Outlaws got put 7th. Like, I just don't know how this happened. Like, the Houston Outlaws are a great team. You look at that team on paper, and they are world class, especially in the current form that they are in. They have Fearless, the grand finals from 2022 MVP, the best Winston player in the world, going into a Winston season, it feels like. Why can you doubt him? Like, yeah, obviously we have the concerns over flexibility, but they even added Gargoyle in case that really becomes an issue, or they need to play the Diva or the Sigma if we end up in a hard meta. Then you pair that with like Pelican, who is just... This man doesn't look like he's going to stop until he wins a championship. He looks tireder and tireder every single year, and he just gets better and better. He's added Tracer to his wheelhouse in just this offseason. It looked so good in the prime. In my opinion, it's not the best right now. It's not proper. It's not Kevster, but it's much improved to a point that he can compete with those guys, and he can stay in the same server and not feel like he is going to hurt this team. Then you have Happy, who is I would say, not peaking as a hit scan player in the past, but we know the heights that he can get to. And if he just does his job, then that will be a big thing for this Houston Outlaws squad. I think a lot of people's concerns for this Outlaws team comes from their struggles within the Pro-Am, right? Because they beat the San Francisco Shock, if I remember correctly, in the first round, but it was very close considering they were playing on 200 ping. And then they only just lost to the Gladiators, which both are great teams, and I feel like people are reading into that almost way too much, it feels like. And especially when you saw some weird stuff with like Gargoyle getting subbed in and sort of like some odd choices. I think this Outlaw squad can't be doubted, especially when they have, in my opinion, Shu Violet right now is the best backline in the Overwatch League. All right, let me define that as well, because obviously we have like Geo Field or Vigilante and stuff like that. As the only two players that ever need to play on a team, they have absolutely everything covered. And that's what I mean of like, if I could take any two support players, any backline in the Overwatch League to play an entirety of a season with no idea what's going to go on, with two new support heroes coming out throughout the season, I would go with Shu Violet. Violet has shown a massive improvement within the main support role of playing the Lucio. We know how good of a break he is. And then he's a world-class flex support. And then Shu's the other flex support, who is just one of the best players in the support role ever, period. So this squad needs to have some respect, as much as maybe it wasn't shown in the Prime. That literally doesn't matter. In my opinion, Prime results were... You should look at them, but it's preseason. It doesn't matter. Just look at this roster. How this roster ends up 7 under... I don't understand how you put them under Glads. I don't understand how you put them under Florida. I don't understand how Dallas is 4th to begin with, but how Houston are worse than the Dallas Fuel. Like, there is way more concerns about those teams. I think Houston has to be here, and I don't see Houston massively underperforming from the 4 spot either. Like... Yeah, maybe they don't have that championship run like we were hoping that they would when we first saw this roster, but I can't see them going below 5th or 6th. If they do, that is a catastrophic failure from the team and the coaching staff that will be responded in kind. It's important to remember when you're looking at this coaching staff as well, like Junkbuck and Neko, like Neko's the head coach, but Junkbuck is still the top. Like he has a a title change, but he's essentially still the top end. He's still making coaching decisions. He still has massive control. Neko's kind of like the figurehead almost, but Neko will obviously be providing a lot of feedback on top of that as well. So then we go here to number 3. And honestly, number 2 and number 3 is very contentious because I genuinely think you can go either way. And unfortunately, we're not going to see either of these teams play very much. But I'm going to go with the Hangzhou Spark for number 3. I had a number 3 on my notes, but I was thinking about moving them to number 2. But honestly, it's so close between these two teams. There's so many, like, it really comes down to what ends up happening, like, with these teams and, like, how good the shock rookies are going to be. But let's talk about the Spark first, because this is genuinely a Chinese super team. This is probably what Team China is going to be going into the World Cup. This is the combination of the Chengdu Hunters and the Hangzhou Spark, the best pieces across the board that could be on this team. Maybe you can argue like Lengsa should be out for like a Xerneas or something like that. But for the most part, this is one of the best teams that you could ever put together for a Chinese team. The DPS duo is Shy and Leaf, which, in my opinion, is the best DPS duo in the Overwatch League. And I don't even think that's a hot take. Like, there are some world-class ones. We got Proper Heesang. We got Lip Stalker. We got so many great teams, but Shy Leave is the 2021 MVP. We've seen bits and clips from them playing and practicing. They're both in form. If Leave and Shy are both playing in the form that we know and expect from them, it's going to be so difficult to deal with. If we end up in a hit scan Tracer meta where Leave has Tracer and he doesn't have to worry about whatever the fuck Jinmu is doing, and he just has Shy clicking heads in the backline, like, it is going to be some of the best Overwatch we've ever seen, and I'm curious to see how some of these other teams are going to deal with it. And I think that is why I am so high on this Spark team, is just because of the DPS lineup, right? Obviously, when you look at the tanks and supports, there are minor concerns, but there are concerns. Gushui has historically been one of the best Winstons in the game, but he hasn't shown much flexibility. His Reinhardt looked fucking weird, but that could have been a Spark issue. His Wrecking Ball, they had a Gaga, so that he didn't really have to play it. We haven't really, sorry, not Gaga, I can't remember the name, but Gushui's tanks has not really been played, and his flexibility hasn't been shown. And then his counterpart, who's going to fill in this off-tank roles, is 20, also known as Elsa from the Chengdu Hunters of past. Elsa had his best season in 2021 and then retired. So we were all really excited about Elsa with the success of Chengdu Hunters. Elsa was playing really well. But then he retired, and it's like, he hasn't played Overwatch 2. We haven't seen 20 play Overwatch 2. So it's kind of hard to be high on him as a player, even if the last time we saw him was very good, when we don't know what to expect. So it might become a non-issue if we do end up in a Winston meta, at least in the short term, but you know, I do have my concerns with these guys. And in the backline, I think Monk is incredible. Monk as a flex support has always performed well any team he's ever been on. He's mechanically insane and has hard carried matches for any team that he has played for in the past. I think he's been bouncing around in the sort of APAC region for a while. He was on Chengdu Hunt. Maybe he was just on Chengdu Hunters. Why do I feel like he's been bouncing around? But he was very good on Chengdu Hunters. I thought he had a stint on the Guangzhou Charge. Maybe I'm thinking of far away and I'm sort of mixing these two up. But Monk is incredible, nonetheless. Like, I feel like Monk just stands out in my brain of like watching Chengdu games and then being like, yeah, Monk did Monk things. And then Lengsa is kind of like what I talked about with a sort of fixer, is like Lengsa is fine. Like, honestly, I'm a little worried if we end up in a double flex support, but everything we've seen from Lengsa has been good. He's had a lot of success in his career in the past, but it doesn't feel like we've seen that from him. So we'll see, and that's my minor concern. But my entire faith of this Hangzhou Spark team is propped up on Shy Leave, but also the fact that they have Ray as the head coach, who has been, every time a Chinese team has done well, it has been on the back of Ray. Like, he was the coach of the team, the 2021 Chengdu Hunters, when they had success. He was a coach for Team China when these teams have had success. Like, he has been the best piece. He needs to be the guy that brings this team together, and they have Creed as well, who's been around for a while. So this is an exciting team to watch, but I think they will be heavily contested by the San Francisco Shock. San Francisco Shock are a great team, and you can't doubt that. Obviously, we just saw them in the Pro-Am. We just saw how they can sort of be that team that is going to go back and forth with any contenders. They have a lot of rookies, but some of the most hyped up rookies to enter this league. When you have Proper on the team, we saw how much magic he can make, even on 180 ping. This team will be difficult to deal with. Proper, then you add Heesang. They showed that if they play that Tracer Sombra, they're world class. When Heesang played that Hangzhou, he was very good, right? The only concern I have for this DPS lineup, we saw a little bit in the Pro-Am, is they always want to keep Proper on Tracer, which of course you would. He's the best Tracer in the world. But he's also their hit scan player right now. So if they have to play hit scan Tracer, it feels weird that like Heesang plays the Tracer. And they did it a little bit in the Pro-Am to not much success. And maybe that's because they were forcing that, and like Proper was playing like a Sojourn and like a Cassidy, but it just didn't feel as comfortable for them. So I want to see how they make those adjustments and sort of play to their strengths as the meta starts to go away. But if we go Tracer Sombra, that works very well. Heesang Sombra looked great from the bits and pieces we saw in the Pro-Am. Max and Junmin, it's hard to talk about these guys because they're very hyped up rookies, and you kind of need to lean on that because in the Pro-Am, we didn't see that from either of them. Like Junbin and Max, they were lost. They didn't perform very well. We saw moments of brilliance, but for the most part, there was musical chairs of not just the players, but also the heroes that they were playing. Like Junbin was playing Doomfist, then D.Va, then Winston, then Bull, and all over the place. So I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt of like lack of practice. They were playing on ping. Maybe they were having issues playing on high ping on those certain heroes. Maybe the synergy wasn't there yet, but it looked a little off. So that is a concern that I have for these guys, but they're so good. And these guys are touted as some of the best tanks coming into this league ever, coming out of Korean contenders. So with a bit of time, with coaching from Krusty, I expect these guys to be able to hit their stride. And then the backline is Finn and Vindime. And I think Vindime impressed me a lot last year. People talk about Chio and Chorong, but I feel like Vindime was kind of snubbed with like how much he just did for that Seoul Dynasty roster. His Lucio is nasty. His Brig is incredible. Like he has some worries of overheating, kind of funnily enough, in the same way that Finn does. And this can be something that I'm worried about for the San Francisco Shock, is that Finn and Vindime, I think, will have an issue of if they start to get isolated and start getting focused on too much, it could crumble, because Finn had that issue last year for the San Francisco Shock where it felt like when a lot of pressure was going his way, he just kept falling over and they weren't able to make those adjustments. Maybe with new tanks and a main support on his side, they'll be able to sort of fill in some of those holes, but that was something that they had to deal with and they were struggling with in the Pro-Am. But once again, it becomes really difficult to use the Pro-Am against the Shock because of the ping, because of all those types of stuff. I'm not using that as an excuse to say, oh, ping, they're just going to be the best. I'm more using it as ping. I think we need to invalidate what happened in that Pro-Am, and I don't want to read into the issues that we saw too much and sort of go off of what we know from these guys in the past. And the thing that we know about these guys in the past is these guys are some of the best players that have touched and come out of Korean contenders. We saw and we hyped up Proper last year, and some people didn't believe us. The same thing is being done. Maybe less so, like we're not saying Max and Junbin are going to be MVPs of the league in their first season, but they're going to be competitive with the top end. And the question becomes, can Krusty and 9K get the most out of this team to become that championship roster and go back to putting the San Francisco Shock to being a championship team? So then we end up at number 1. And maybe this is hopium from a lot of people. And maybe, I know there's been some contention of like people are starting to doubt Atlanta Reign. You know, I think the Plat Chat guys, I think putting San Francisco Shock at number 1 without raising those concerns, to me, is a little crazy. As I said, I wanted to put San Francisco Shock 3rd. I think there's so much unproven potential on the San Francisco Shock that these guys didn't even really talk about. They were just putting the San Francisco Shock at number 1 without having any concerns that these rookies aren't going to perform to that level. It's sort of discrediting all their sort of pain points, not in just mechanical play that we saw from the Prime, but how the team's going to structure and work and play together. Because I'm just not as sold that these guys are going to be number 1. While everything that I've seen from Atlanta Reign, obviously they lost in the Prime, but I still think they look to be one of the most coordinated and the most structured teams that we have out there. And the only a few minor concerns I have for these guys. Stalker Lip, I think, is one of the best DPS lineups that we have in the league. Stalker has proven that if he is given the ability to just sort of take control, be the guy on Tracer, on Genji, on Echo, on anything he needs to play, he will step up and he can perform that level. His tracking is disgusting, but funnily enough, it's probably not even the best on his team because Lip is also here. Hitscan God, Sombra God, we saw it from time to time in the Prime. When these guys are on and when they play the right meta, it is disgusting. And if we go into a Tracer Sombra meta, I think Atlanta is going to be a clear favorite going into this tournament. An issue I think Atlanta had in the Prime is that they were so focused on playing that Tracer Sombra that it felt like they kind of lost the hit scan battle. And if Lip had just played Cassidy and they sort of committed to that, I think they would have been able to go toe-to-toe with the teams that, like the teams that they could have been able to go with. Who did they lose to? I'm trying to remember. The Gladiators. Like, if I genuinely think if Lip had just matched Kai on the Cassidy, they could have gone pound for pound and just won, in my opinion. But because they played that Sombra, especially into this like Ramatra style, weird style that the Gladiators were playing, it just kind of caught Atlanta Reign off guard. And I think Atlanta were the better team. Maybe that's just some hard copium, but I do believe that. And I think they will continue to be the best team. We have Hawk as the off-tank player, who I think is one of the best off-tank players we have. Very smart player. If it goes to Doomfist, if it goes to D.Va, if it goes to Sigma, he will be that guy, and I think he will be able to step up. But right now, it feels like a main tank world, and Donghack is impressing a lot of people. The worry I do have about him is that his Wrecking Ball is ridiculous. It was very, very good, and we were excited every time we saw it. It's just the tech, the movement, everything about it is just so smooth. His Winston didn't have that same kind of firepower. It was good. It was fine, but I'm worried that it might be a limiting factor for the Atlanta Reign, but we still need to see more, right? Like, we only really saw one good match against the Gladiators, and I had other concerns about that in that match. But then you look at the backline. They got Phil Chio. We play Lucio anything, we're chilling. Like, they got Phil Chio. But then if we go to double flex support, they have Vigilante, who is mechanically nuts. Like, their backline is stacked from head to toe. Yes, they have that same pain point of, like, they have to sub Chio out if they want to play double flex, but the quality of players is fine, that you don't even have to worry about those types of issues. Like, this roster from head to toe is some of the best players that you could put in the roles. There is the concerns, as I said, of like having a big roster, having to make these subs, but small rosters aren't necessarily always the best. And I think small rosters are a lot more of a gamble of like, what is the meta going to be? Are we going to be comfortable all the time? Is it going to go against us? Atlanta Reign is meta-proof across the board. If they play the right players at the right time, they are meta-proof and they will be world-class at any single meta that goes their way. And that is why I have utmost confidence in this Atlanta Reign squad, is I don't have a pain point of any single situation that could hurt them right now. And that is my Overwatch League 2023 power rankings. Or actually, I'll leave it on the screen for a little bit longer. It's important to remember how this top 9 is going to perform. This is like a completely different tier to everyone else. I think there's a pretty big tier break between these guys and these guys, but then every tier break is very important. It's going to be contentious in these top 9 and this middle 6. It's going to go back and forth. Shit's going to happen in the season. Anything could happen, but this is where I'm leaving it. Hopefully, we do better than the Scrimbucks exchange of Yiska. It's been another great preseason. I've really enjoyed doing these power rankings. Thank you very much for watching all the team previews. We've made it through the long, dark off-season. We got Overwatch 2 again. Yes, there's a lot of things happening in the background, but I'm just excited to be back. I'm going to be casting a lot this year. I'm really excited to move into that new role as well. But For that reason, I'm going to be doing a lot of co-streams, watching these matches live. So make sure to check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Custa. Give me a follow if you guys want to see me talk about the games as they happen. But otherwise, I'll see you guys on broadcast. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of my power rankings down below. Appreciate you very much, and I will see you guys next time.